Aloha. My Bible is open to 1 Kings chapter 21, and we're continuing this devotional series that I have entitled The Elijah Chronicles. And this actually is part 8. It's hard to believe that so many have already just been flying by, but we're just in this little study looking at the life of Elijah because I see quite a few parallels between the times of Elijah, what he was going through and experiencing in his culture, in his context, and what's going on here in the context and the culture of our world today. There's just a lot of similarities. And so if you haven't had a chance to see some of the previous devotional messages, you can go back further into the Facebook page, just scroll down, you can start picking them up. It's entitled The Elijah Chronicles, and this is number 8. Today. This is part 8. So in 1 Kings chapter 21, 5 years now have gone by from that moment when Elijah was so discouraged, fled for his life, fleeing from this threat of Queen Jezebel, all the way to Beersheba, probably at least 70 miles or further, and just discouraged, tired, wet, exhausted, and he's fast asleep, feels a little poking on his arm, opens his eyes, stares into the face of this celestial being, an angel. And the angel looks at Elijah and says, "Look, you got to drink something. Here's some water. You need to eat something. Here's some angel food cake." It's a phenomenal story. But 5 years now. So when we get to 1 Kings chapter 21, keep in mind it's been 5 years. During those 5 years, Elijah has called Elisha to be a follower and a colleague. Elijah has been building up the sons of the prophets, and now we pick up what's going on with the king Ahab and the queen Jezebel. So we'll pick it up here. So look, you can just open your Bible to 1 Kings chapter 21. This is where we're going to be. This is our little devotional passage here today. So you can just leave it open right here. I'm going to read a verse. We'll push the pause button, reflect on it for just a moment, and at the end, there's 2 life lessons, practical applications, I think, for your life and for mine today. So here it is, 1 Kings chapter 21 and verse 1. "And it came to pass after these things that Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard which was in Jezreel, next to the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria." So get the picture here. So here's the palace. Obviously, King Ahab, Queen Jezebel live in the palace. Right next door, so the property just adjacent to it, is this big, beautiful, lush vineyard, grapes, that is owned by Naboth. And so Ahab probably, every day, wherever he walks out of the palace, he sees this beautiful vineyard. Every time he comes back to the palace, he sees this beautiful vineyard. He comes with the bright idea, hey, listen, I would like that vineyard. So look, you need to understand Naboth is just an everyday, ordinary person. He's just living life. This is his vineyard. He tills the soil. He takes care of the grapes. He's a husband. He's a father. He's a neighbor. He's a businessman. He's a churchgoer. He's just an everyday guy. And it just so happens that his vineyard is next to the palace. So this is where it gets interesting. Verse 2, "So the king Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, 'Give me your vineyard, that I might have it for a vegetable garden, because it is near to me. It's next to my house. And for it,'" so it's like, you can give it to me, but I don't want you to just give it to me for free, so I'm going to offer you something for it. So he says, "And I'll give you the vineyard better." So this is it. "I'll give you a better vineyard. So if you give me this vineyard, I'll give you another vineyard someplace else. Or," he said, this is the king, "if it seems good to you, I will give you its worth in money." So that's the deal. So look, the king, he's out and about doing something. Naboth is there, probably in his vineyard. And the king walks, so Ahab enters into the vineyard. There's Naboth and said, "Hey, listen, I want to cut a deal with you. I really want your vineyard. So here's what I'm willing to offer. I'll either trade your vineyard, or if you want, I'll give you the cash. I'll give you cash for the vineyard because I want to turn this vineyard into a vegetable garden. Yeah, look, you're going to have to push the pause button here for just a second because I don't understand this concept. I really don't. I mean, who in their right mind takes a lush, living, delicious, grape-growing vineyard that is already mature by now, producing grapes, and turns it into a vegetable garden? Growing, what, squash? Turnips versus grapes? What? Please, I mean, what are you thinking? I mean, who would do that? I mean, you need to understand, again, the kind of vineyard that we're talking about. So, look, I lived for a number of years in Northern California, so we're talking Napa Valley, very famous for the growing of the grapes. Ukiah, very famous for the growing of the grapes. And a vineyard is beautiful. A grape vineyard is absolutely stunning. And then, of course, they're just growing these juicy grapes in this rich Northern California Napa Valley soil. And that's what's happening here. So, look, do you need me to remind you of the land that's growing these grapes? So, do you remember before the children of Israel, they've started for the promised land. So Moses sends 12 spies into the land and say, hey, listen, go check it out. We hear that this is just a beautiful land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So why don't you go check it out, see what's going on there. And by the way, when you come back, bring something with you so we could get an idea of just how fertile this land is. So do you remember? What was it that they chose to come back with? Clusters of grapes. I mean, the grapes were so large and luscious and delicious that they said, hey, look, we're going to go back to the children of Israel. Let's just show them what the land is like that we're going to be coming to. And so they would just, they clipped off these bunches of grapes and brought them back. I mean, grapes that are just these huge, juicy grapes as just a tangible reminder of what this land flowing with milk and honey was going to be all about. So look, the land was known for grapes. So you try to explain, why would you take a perfectly good vineyard of grapes and turn it into a vegetable garden? I mean, it doesn't make sense. But notice what happens next. But Naboth said to King Ahab, so this is in verse 3. So Naboth turns, he looks at the king, and he says, hey, listen, the Lord forbids that I should give the inheritance of my fathers to you. So this is a little bit of the background. So when the children of Israel were splashing across the river Jordan, finally getting to this land flowing with milk and honey, God made it very, very clear. This was Leviticus law. You can read about this in Numbers. God was very specific. In the inheritance that is given to you, you shall not sell it. And the reason why God made that as a mandate in Levitical law is that he didn't want this land flowing with milk and honey. The inheritance that he was giving to the children of Israel sold off piece by piece to the heathen. Because, listen, if every family were to sell off a piece of land, eventually there'd be no land left. So Leviticus law forbid that they even sell the land to anyone, period. So Ahab comes to Naboth and says, oh, well, listen, I'm the king. Your vineyard is next to the palace. I'd like to buy it from you. And Naboth says, look, even if I wanted to sell it to you, I can't. It is forbidden by God. I can't sell it to you. The reaction of the king is not very kingly, in my humble opinion. So look at what. So this is what. So immediately, as soon as that conversation is over, Naboth says, "Listen, I can't sell it to you, even if I wanted to. The Lord forbids it." Verse 4, so Ahab went into his house, so he goes back into the palace, sullen and displeased because of the word which Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him. For he had said, I will not give you the inheritance of my father. And the king lays down in his bed, probably a king-size bed. I mean, after all, he is the king. So he lays down on his bed and turns away his face and would eat no food. You know what's happening here, don't you? You can tell immediately what's happening. We have a king who is pouting, doesn't get his way, it's not going in his favor, so he makes his way up into his palatial palace bedroom, lays down on the bed, and he pouts. Now look, it's one thing for a kid to get upset, not getting his own way, and pouting. But we're talking about an adult here. It's embarrassing. We're talking about the king. It's humiliating. I mean, the king, look, it's not as if he didn't already have enough. By this time he had 2 palaces. He had everything his heart could desire. But he has his eyes set on this vineyard, and because he doesn't get it, he pouts. He pouts. In fact, apparently it was so severe. It says that he didn't eat any food. So for supper, the queen's sitting down there for supper, and she notices the king's not there. She's wondering, well, what in the world's going on? It's not like he usually misses a meal. So she decides to go see how her husband is doing, how the king is doing. So she makes her way up the stairs into the master bedroom, and there she sees the king laying on the king-size bed, and she sits on the edge of the bed. And notice what the conversation that takes place next. But verse 5, Jezebel, his wife, came to him, said to him, "Why is your spirit so sullen that you eat no food?" She can tell that he's upset, he's pouting, he's carrying on like a child. So well, what's going on? Why are you behaving like this? And so it slowly begins to come out. He's a little hesitant as to say what's going on, but she encourages him and says, "Come on, you can tell Jez all about it. Why are you so upset? Why are you so sad?" I have a feeling that the look on Ahab's face as he's pouting looks a lot like Sharon and I at one time owned a Basset Hound dog. Basset Hound. Do you know the long ears, the sad-looking face? Even when a Basset Hound was happy and his tail's wagging, he still looks sad. That's just the classic, I'm thinking Ahab's looking like a Basset Hound right about now. Look on his face, and he said to her, "Well, because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, 'Give me your vineyard for money, or else, if it pleases you, I will give you another vineyard for it.' And he answered, 'I will not give you my vineyard.'" Now, push the pause button here for just a moment, because that's a lie. That what Ahab is saying to Jezebel is a lie. Because Naboth didn't say, "I won't sell you this land." He said, "By Levitical law, I'm not able to sell you. According to the Lord's demand, I can't give you this land." And then verse 7, Jezebel, his wife, said to him, "You now..." So this is the way I picture what happens next. So as soon as he tells this sad, sordid little story, she jumps off the edge of the bed, stands there on the side of the bed. Her hands are on her hips. She looks down at King Ahab, and she says, "Now you exercise authority over Israel!" ! "Arise, eat, let your heart be cheerful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite." We're starting to see why it is that Jezebel has the reputation that she has. In fact, at the end of the chapter, towards the end of the chapter here in verse 25, notice the description of Queen Jezebel. "But there was no one like Ahab who sold himself to do wickedness in the sight of the Lord. But Jezebel, his wife, stirred him up." So you got Ahab doing all this wickedness among the people of God. But the one behind it is Jezebel, who stirs, as the description here is in Scripture, she's the one that's actually stirring him up. So she said, "Listen, you get off this bed, you go back downstairs, you eat. I'm going to take care of this for you." So the next several verses, and we're not going to read them. So she calls together a kangaroo court. It's all made up. So she gets the court together. She gets a couple of false witnesses that come along. They falsely accuse Naboth of just drummed up charges. And at the end of this kangaroo court, they actually drag him out of the city and they stone him to death. So in essence, Jezebel takes the life of Naboth so she can give the land, this vineyard, to her husband, the king. And so when Jezebel hears what happened to Naboth, she says to Ahab, "Arise, take possessions of the vineyard, which he refused to give you for money, for he is not alive, but he is dead." And so Ahab got up, went down to take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. Now look, I can almost guarantee you something. This is such an obscure story in Scripture, I doubt you have ever heard either a devotional message on this particular passage or sermon. Nobody talks about this. I can't, listen, at my age, I've never heard anyone ever take the time to talk about this passage here. We usually just skip this little vignette or cameo from the story of Elijah, and we just move on. But you see, even from this, what I would suggest, a rather obscure story, I think that there are, let me share with you what I believe to be two life lessons, two practical applications that we can take from this story. Application life lesson number one, I would just simply say, word it this way: don't sell your inheritance. Don't sell your inheritance. Because you see, that's the temptation that comes. I mean, the temptation. So when you look at the life that we live, there's the temptation of selling the inheritance that God has given. Listen, do you remember the story of Jacob and Esau? So Esau, you remember this story well. So Esau sells his inheritance for a lunch of lentils. He was willing to sell his entire inheritance. As the oldest child, he sells his inheritance for a bowl of lentils. You see, that's the temptation that comes along, is that God has given us this inheritance, kind of like, well, listen, why don't you sell out? Why don't you sell out so that you can enjoy the culture of today? Just go with the flow, ride with the tide. And we have a classic example here of somebody who did not sell their inheritance. We have Naboth. He said, no, I'm not going to, listen, I'm not going to sell it. This is something that has been given to me, and I'm not going to let it go. It's a temptation. Follow the world, follow God. The pull of culture, the pull of Christ. It's a battle that you and I face every single day. And in a weak moment, stumble, fall, and just sell it all. Say, hey, listen, I'm just gonna follow another path for a period of time. I think this is another classic example. Don't sell your inheritance at any cost. Don't sell your inheritance. I would say the second lesson to consider here from this little story is just a life lesson, a practical application, and that is to be reminded that your treasure is in heaven. Your treasure is in heaven. You see, in our culture today, there's this insatiable appetite for just more and more and more and more. Sort of like the king. I mean, what more did the king need? I mean, please, when is enough enough? I mean, he's got palaces. He's got chariots. He has all the help that you could imagine. The way he has more money than he's probably ever going to be able to spend in a lifetime. So there's a vineyard here that apparently he doesn't have it. He even wants, at any cost, he's got to have that vineyard. But see, listen, this is the insatiable pull of our culture today. Why are there so many professional businesses that have storage units? Because in our culture today is that once you filled up the house full of stuff, once you completely packed out the garage full of stuff, you've got to find another place to put all of your stuff. And so now you go out and start renting storage units to put more stuff in. But you see, we need to be reminded is that our treasure is in heaven. Our treasure is not here on earth. This is just stuff. And you see, Wall Street, the only purpose of Wall Street is to somehow through advertising convince you that you need more and more and more. You need the vineyards of this world. So if you're going to want to experience happiness, you got to go after the vineyard. But the truth of the matter is that our treasure is in heaven. That's the vineyard that ultimately you and I will experience in life. It's the only vineyard that really matters at all. Treasure is in heaven. Don't sell the birthright. Let me end with this. So here's the contrast in this story. You got Jezebel and you got Jesus. Jezebel, Jesus. Do you remember how when Jesus was here on this earth, how the devil would try over and over and over again to take the inheritance of Jesus away? Just say, hey, listen, just sell out. Hey, listen, I'll give it to you. Just bow down to me. I will give you everything that you want. I'll give you this planet if that's what you want. Just bow down and acknowledge me. The devil tried to take the inheritance away from Jesus. But Jesus did not give up his inheritance, because this is the inheritance that he has passed on to us. This is now the inheritance that Jezebel, the devil, is trying to take away from us. Don't let go of the inheritance. Because you see, the fact of the matter is, no matter how beautiful the vineyards are here on this planet, God is preparing a vineyard for us that someday he's going to give. It's going to have the juiciest, largest, most luscious fruits that you can't even begin to imagine. It's the inheritance that God has for you and for me. It's the choice. Jezebel, Jesus. And if we stick with Jesus, he will ultimately usher us in to the inheritance that he has prepared for your heart, my heart, your life, my life, our Ohana. He'll usher us in to the wonders of a heavenly vineyard that will last forever. That, my friends, is an inheritance